There is a secret addiction sweeping Britain that has long since plagued our high streets and is now infiltrating our own homes. This addiction is not sex, booze or drugs. It is not even illegal and has recently been encouraged by law as beneficial for the economy. It is gambling, and it has been given a massive, insidious boost by the internet and technology, crossing new boundaries and drawing in increasingly younger generations, who are the most vulnerable to addiction, yet have the least support. At a time when there is little awareness of the dangers of gambling and its effects on mental health, will Britain's secret addiction be realised too late?
A recent report by the Gambling Commission has revealed that more than 70% of the population gamble. Think of the National Lottery, seaside arcades, major sporting events such as the Grand National and Ascot. Our sense of national identity is invariably tied up with what is known as a good old flutter. So what's the harm?
What could initially start out as a bit of fun could potentially turn into an obsession. In particular, young men between 16 and 25 are the most at risk of developing a gambling problem. According to the latest figures, there are 450,000 problem gamblers in the UK, of which 130,000 are young people. But the number may actually be far higher.
I think the prevalence of problem gambling in the UK is underestimated, and I think there's 3 reasons for that. The first reason is that I think problem gamblers are less likely to be in the house or less likely to answer the door or be willing to participate in a survey. I think the second thing is if they do participate, they're probably less likely to give you honest answers, and particularly if there's significant others that are there while the interview is taking place. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, I think problem gamblers would be less likely to remember. The accuracy of their recall is probably going to be, we know this from lots of different research studies, that problem gamblers underestimate how much they spend, they underestimate how much it's had a negative impact on their lives, and they tend to overestimate the positives. So for those 3 reasons, I don't think that the current prevalence rate, as is estimated for the UK, is accurate.
Young people in Britain are inundated with gambling opportunities, whether it's on their smartphones, computers or television screens.
There is now 31 hours and 55 minutes of live casino gambling on terrestrial television every week. And adverts are constantly on our screens. Gambling adverts on television and the internet are undoubtedly engaging a younger audience, especially around live sporting events. But it's still uncertain what impact this could have on their adult lives.
Everyone will have noticed an explosion in the extent to which gambling is being advertised, is on billboards, is being sponsorship in terms of sports. And we need to think about to what extent is that going to have an impact on young people particularly.
With this in mind, I contacted the Advertising Standards Agency to ask why they condone showing gambling adverts at 9 o'clock in the morning. This is what they had to say.
The rules surrounding gambling advertising contain both strict content and scheduling rules to ensure that where ads do appear, they are socially responsible, with a strong emphasis on protecting young and vulnerable people. The rules ensure that ads on TV cannot be shown before the watershed or around programmes with a high proportion of children in the audience.
However, they also said
the rules do not place a limit on the amount of advertising for bookmakers that can appear in or around sporting events.
Their response was more evasive than I had hoped for and mirrored the current legislation almost word for word, with little independent comment.
You don't just have to watch TV to be inundated by gambling adverts. They are also all over the high street, displayed prominently in the windows of betting shops. Research has shown that since the beginning of the recession in 2008, the number of high street betting shops has increased by 10.5%. So now there are almost 8,000 betting shops, making them more common than newsagents. These shops are multiplying in some of the country's most deprived areas, where under 25s are among the hardest hit by unemployment.
I'm in Hackney North, where youth unemployment has risen by 214% in the last year. This borough has 3 times the amount of betting shops than the average borough. On this high street alone, there are 9 betting shops. That averages out approximately 1 every 100 metres. Even the old town hall behind me has been turned into a bookmaker's. And Hackney isn't the only London borough fighting the bookie boom.
One woman who has been on the front line of this battle with the bookies is Labour councillor Rowena Davis, who is leading the High Street's first campaign.
The High Street's first campaign started about a month ago when a whole lot of people in my constituency in Peckham were complaining about the number of betting shops on their high streets. And they say, look, they're blighting the public spaces that we love, they're fueling addiction, they're taking money out of the area, and they're putting off other businesses from moving in. Can you please do something to limit them? Because there are now 7 in my main high street and 77 in Southwark, which is just one borough of London alone. And I looked into this as a councillor and I realised that despite having powers over some types of shops, like if someone wanted to open a fast food restaurant in my area, they wouldn't be able to do it if we blocked it locally. We have no powers at all, in any meaningful sense, to limit the number of bookmakers in our area.
This is because of the Gambling Act, which was implemented in 2007, with the aim of deregulating the industry. As a result, it allowed more bookmakers per area, and that's not the only problem.
And the other issue I think that's really important to flag is the changing nature of the gambling industry. The increase in machines over horse racing, for example, is particularly designed to target younger people. It appeals to them more, it's fast, it's quick, it's easy.
Lurking inside almost all bookmakers are what are known as fixed odds betting terminals, or FOBTs. These electronic gambling machines have been dubbed by some as the crack cocaine of gambling. Many problem gamblers develop an addiction to these machines in their early 20s, which then has a profound emotional impact later on in their lives. One such person is Tony, who blogs about his recovery. As a result of his severe addiction, he was forced to leave the country.
I mean, you've ruined your life. I mean, you know, I'm 40, I have nothing, no assets, nothing of any financial value. I have felt, from my sort of nearest and dearest, almost a kind of a disgust at what I'm doing. It's kind of, you know, they didn't see it for a very long time as really being an illness, but maybe I was stupid or I was greedy or I was making the wrong choices. With gambling, unfortunately, I've had for a long time those messages reinforced that, you know, I'm a bad apple. It's really, really demoralising as an addiction, and you feel very alone and on your own.
It is this loneliness and desperation which raises the rate of suicide for problem gamblers to twice the national average. And it's not just the gamblers themselves who are affected, but also their loved ones. Tony explained the impact his gambling has had on his wife.
You know, she's as much in, you know, difficulty as I am, but through no fault of her own. Honestly, I feel ashamed about what I've done and you know, the mess that we're in, and we've got a young son as well, so we're struggling to bring him up. In the end, what can you do? You have to just keep going forward and try to find a way to go forward. You know, it is obviously very devastating.
It was high street bookmakers which first attracted Tony, but is it really just a case of out of sight, out of mind? If campaigners like Rowena do manage to banish betting shops from our high streets, it may well push gambling further into the digital arena and straight into the hands and homes of tech-savvy young people. With 50% of 16 to 25-year-olds in possession of a smartphone, it's worrying how easy it is for them to download gambling apps or browse the internet for gambling websites. Online gambling has risen by 23% since 2008, and compared to high street betting shops is far harder to regulate. More worryingly though, studies have found that online gamblers are 3 times more likely to become problem gamblers.
The main drivers for problem gambling on the internet is that you can play 24/7, you can switch on your computer at any point in time, lots of variety in terms of the games that you can have. Now let's not forget, with the internet you can play for free, you can play for 1 cent a go, 1p a go, and while that might not be problematic at the start, it gets people playing, and that can lead to different things.
To further understand the allure of online gambling, I met with 2 young poker players who explained to me why they continue to play despite the risks. What do you enjoy most about gambling?
I really like the fact or the idea of being able to compete for money, because I'm a quite competitive person. And yeah, it is very fun, and especially if you win, you feel very good.
But at least when it comes to online poker, or generally poker, I would say it's to some extent, of course, a gambling game, but then to a very high degree, it's also a game of skill, really, and it's a lot of different, let's say, skills that you would need. You know, on the one hand, you have to understand the game, you have to understand the numbers and the odds involved in it, but just as much you have to understand really yourself and what information you are giving away and what information other people are giving away. So really, it's a game of information. Rather, you know, I didn't see it as a game of money really as such.
Were you never concerned about the risk?
Not really, because I guess I always had some sort of limit that I knew I wouldn't really cross in that sense. Even though I was very much into playing it, I don't think I was ever addicted.
While many young people may not experience any problems with gambling, Phil started gambling seriously in his early 20s, but found his life in tatters when he became dangerously addicted to online gambling.
What took it to a whole new, lower level was the internet. Being able to gamble literally 24/7 anywhere in the world. I've always worked overseas. I was in Algeria, in the middle of the Sahara Desert. I got into internet gambling, and that just spiraled it out of control. I'm not doing it for the adrenaline. I'm not doing it for the fun of being sat in front of a laptop screen for 7 or 8 hours. Because you've started creating a monster, the only place you find peace is when you're gambling, because you blot out everything. You're just focused in on the turn of a card, the run of a race, the roll of a dice.
In the most extreme cases, those who are struggling with their addiction to gambling can commit themselves to residential treatment at Gordon House. To protect the identities of the residents, we can't reveal the location, but it is one of 2 sites offering specialised support and treatment to acutely addicted gamblers. I'm about to go and meet Ruth Champion, who is the Director of Clinical Services at Gordon Moody. She says that in the last 5 years, the average age of residents at the clinic has dropped from mid-30s to early 20s. I want to know why she believes this is happening and what can be done to treat those who find themselves in serious trouble.
We deal with the worst end of the spectrum here. Usually people that come here have tried most other types of intervention. So it's not uncommon that when people come in here, they're homeless, they have no friends, they have no family, they don't have any possessions, they're really as low as low can be. Many of them have tried to kill themselves because they just cannot cope with their life anymore. That's not uncommon. The treatment that we offer here is cognitive behavioural based therapy, which consists of group therapy meetings and individual sort of one-to-one sessions with an allocated support worker. So the main focus of the treatment programme is for to help individuals understand their addiction, get them to understand why they behave the way that they do, the way they think and the way they react to that, and help them to find different ways of coping with their life, basically, therefore reducing the need to gamble.
Would you say that there is a common pattern to the way that people begin gambling and get addicted?
For the people that come through our doors, it usually starts off quite young for most of them, not all of them, and it starts as a social thing that they'll do with their friends or in the arcades on holiday with their folks on the seaside, and then the penny drop machines and what have you. And it starts as quite a positive social experience, and then later on when they may have a time in their life where they find difficult. It may be the normal teenage progression, which a lot of people find difficult, that they'll start to repeat that behaviour. And again, it may start that they're doing it with their friends, but then they start to do it on their own. And what it enables them to do is block out everything else that's going on for them. So they start to then using it as a coping response, because if they're doing that, they don't have to think about whatever it is that's bothering them. And then it usually ends up in a bit of a cycle where the actual thing that initially is helping them to escape is the problem that they're needing to escape from, and they get stuck in this cycle.
Ruth then made an interesting point about one particular sector of young people, students.
I see people coming through our doors that have been to university, and it's the first time they've ever been away from home, and they're feeling under pressure, and they have these huge pots of money that come in the form of their student loans, etc., etc. It may be the first time that they've ever had any substantial kind of money, and for some people that's actually when they start to gamble.
In the last 3 years, GamCare has also seen a dramatic rise in students making calls to their helpline. It would seem that elements of student life are definitely geared towards gambling. The sudden injection of money as the student loan comes in, the fast internet connections, and a mixture of boredom and isolation along with a lack of routine all create the right environment for a potential gambler.
I think internet gambling particularly appeals to students for lots of reasons. I think students have more spare time on their hands. Students consider themselves to be more educated and brighter than the average person on the street. And then they think as a result they'll be able to master the gambling activity, particularly gambling activities that involve skill, like poker, for example. Quite often students, when they have not a lot of money, they believe that with something like poker they can play, and if they're very cautious and very disciplined, they can make a small amount of money. And they see that as quite useful because they can, you'll have students, for example, who study and do their coursework while at the same time playing poker. They see it as passing the time, but also making money at the same time. And the number one thing that a student would say who gambles quite a lot, for example, with internet poker, is I can make money, probably just as much money as working in Tesco's or working in the pub, but it's much more enjoyable, and I can do it whenever I want. So why wouldn't I do that?
The scale of problem gambling among students becomes apparent when you look at online forums. Websites such as the Student Room contain several anonymous threads revealing the consequences of gambling. Many young people evidently do have problems but are unwilling to speak openly.
I'm 20 years old and I've lost £4,000 at the poker tables online.
I've literally emptied my bank account. I can't stop thinking about it.
I also had family problems at the time, and it used to take my mind off things. Now I just can't stop myself.
I'm quite concerned at the level of secrecy surrounding this addiction, so I asked Phil what makes it so hard for young people to speak out.
You believe that the only way out of the addiction is to stay in the addiction. They know they have a problem, but it's the shame of it, for sure, because if to admit it, you basically have to say you failed at gambling, and to admit you failed at gambling is a little bit, you've got to say you failed at life as well. So it's pretty huge to actually say enough is enough. To have to admit failure at gambling at such a young age, when you've got all your friends around, your mates and everything else, I think it's a pretty huge thing to do that most students 19, 20, 21 years old are not equipped to do.
With young people so reluctant to talk openly, it's challenging to find information on problem gambling among students. However, I'm going to Manchester to attend a conference that might help shed some light on this secretive issue.
Back in 2010, the Higher Education Academy commissioned a study into how gambling can affect students at university, but also the support networks available to them. Researchers are meeting today here at Manchester Metropolitan University to reveal the key findings of this study.
2 years' worth of research surprisingly resulted in little more than a survey. They do plan to distribute posters and calendars to universities, but without the involvement of the NUS, I feel it might not really engage the students. Following this disappointing outcome, I decided to carry out my own research by contacting some of Britain's top universities. I want to know if the universities are aware of the degree of gambling which exists among their student population, and what they're doing about it, so I sent them a Freedom of Information request. While I waited to hear back from the universities, I visited Simon, a student at the Royal Northern College of Music. He told me he started gambling when he was 18, but has since given up as he found it so addictive.
I think one of the main attractions in gambling is the fact that the money is so easy, and in a society today that's completely ruled by money, like the more money you have, the more power you have, and also a lot of people are very lazy, and it's no work pressing a button and getting £20 in a second is just the appeal of just getting such easy money without having to do any work, and sometimes huge amounts of money, is really, really attractive, and that's part of the reason it's so addictive.
When did you realise that it was actually getting a bit too serious and you were...
When I realised I was spending all the money I was making just putting it in machines, and then by complete chance, obviously, in the casino we hit the jackpot and won £4,000, two of us in there, just on a £20 note, and kept spinning the slots and won £4,000, and we just agreed, like, that was the end of it. We gained more overall than we put in, and we thought just leave it at that.
Is there anyone you know that's actually taken a bit further and crossed that line?
Yeah, there's I've got a friend at university who gets his loan and then just spends it all on online poker, because I talked to him about it, and he thinks it's not gambling because he says there's a lot of control in poker, which is true, but it's still gambling. Like, there's more choice and control in poker than the other games, but it's still down to chance, really. And he just loses it almost always straight away, like talking £1,000, like just gone within weeks.
And that doesn't deter him?
Not really. He always says after he loses it, never again, but it's just so addictive. You can't imagine like how addictive it is. So he just keeps coming back, and next term, straight away, all gone again.
As I left Manchester, I reflected on what Simon had told me. I felt more sure than ever that gambling among students is a problem.
I've now received all the FOIs that we sent to the Russell Group universities, and it's very clear that they do not seem to think that gambling among their students is a problem. Very few cases are actually recorded by the universities. For example, Newcastle University say we do not record this data. The University of Southampton also say we do not record gambling addiction as a distinct category. This is really important in us trying to find out how many students actually gamble. Something that I learnt at the conference in Manchester was that many counsellors do keep notes, but obviously they're confidential, so they're not passed between departments, which again prevents us finding out just how many students have problems with gambling. What the FOIs highlight is that while some of the universities may well be open to the idea of implementing awareness campaigns, none of them actually record the data. So how can they actually find out if there's a problem among their students?
Clearly, with such difficulty in trying to treat young people with gambling problems, more emphasis needs to be placed on prevention and education. I spoke to David and Matt from Grasp, which is one of the only gambling charities that does not receive funding from the gambling industry itself. Their aim is to prevent problem gambling before it takes hold.
The latest figures have picked up that parents regarding children, only 5% of them would educate them on the risks of gambling. It's 100% for drugs and it's 64% for alcohol. So it tells you that all these youngsters coming through, they haven't had the education to warn them of something that will be more destructive to them than any other addiction. That's the fact.
Probably the most important thing that you can do to prevent a young person from developing a problem is education. Teaching them, first of all, that gambling isn't a way to make money, it isn't a way to deal with problems and escape whatever it is that they have on their plates at that time. It's really just a way that people enjoy themselves or enjoy recreation.
Although the awareness is starting to grow, I think, in this country, it's still very early days where people don't really tend to take it seriously as an addiction, because with drugs, with alcohol, you can physically see the impact that it's having on somebody. They start to look ill, it affects their performance, but with gambling, as long as they can get their hands on money, they will continue until they can't get their hands on anymore.
Out of the 7 organisations currently funded by the gambling industry, 5 are focused purely on treatment, and just 2 are looking into research and prevention. From everything I have learnt, I can see how the population and especially young people are at risk without even being aware of it. From the advertising and the betting shops to the accessibility, it all changed with the Gambling Act. I was keen to challenge the man behind it, former MP Richard Cabourn.
I tried to put onto the statute book an Act of Parliament that was bringing gambling into mainstream entertainment, in a way that was responsible and protected young people particularly.
Some people have said that the Gambling Act is responsible for the increasing numbers of betting shops opening in deprived areas. What is your view on this?
Well, there may well be an element of that, but I'm bound to say I think the local authorities who have got the power through the planning regimes to actually control that.
But people like, for example, Rowena Davies, who's leading the High Streets First campaign, claim that they don't have that power.
Well, I'm afraid he needs to go back and read the Act.
As universities don't have the means to monitor gambling problems among students, I wanted to question Richard about the data available.
I said that there had to be an independent prevalence study, funded by, but indeed the operation of the prevalence study would be by a reputable independent company, which it has been.
That £500,000 funding has now been cut and there is going to be no more prevalence survey.
Well, let's do
so what happens now in terms of...
Look, let me deal with the Act, which I was responsible for. I put in, yes, a radical overhaul of gambling, but I also put into that safeguards. And in those safeguards was a prevalence study. Now, if the government want to continue that prevalence study, that's a negotiation between the government, the Gambling Commission and the industry.
It is worrying that there will no longer be an official study to monitor the impact which all these changes in the law are having on young people. Funding for other studies is vital.
We get around 300 to 400,000 for research every year. And I think a lot of UK researchers would feel that there needs to be a better infrastructure, more funding available, but not just for research, but also for things like education and prevention, and also in terms of treatment initiatives.
The money given by the industry to help problem gamblers is not a statutory levy and currently stands at just 0.085% of their profits before tax. But should it be higher? I invited all the main representatives of the gambling industry to comment on our findings, but they all declined.
In the future, I do think there will be a need for more provision, such as ours, for treatment of gambling addiction, definitely, yeah. Because we've got a whole generation of people coming up who have grown up with gambling in their lives, and it will provide an escape.
For all young people with gambling problems, it's not just the money spent, but also the time lost, which can negatively impact their mental health and studies. Who should bear responsibility for problem gambling remains unclear, but while the tech industry grows and gambling continues to boom, something must be done now about this secret addiction. Otherwise, we are betting on the future of the next generation.